Okay, everything is rolling?
Is this one recording?
Yep, the red light's on. Okay, let's say a word of prayer. Lord Jesus, we're thankful for this day and opportunity to do your service. Lord, you said you should know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And that's what we're interested in accomplishing here today, in Jesus' name. All right, now one more little technical thing, and it's weird, but it goes like this. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, Kay, now I'll tell you. What I just did is simply to synchronize the cameras. It's not anything magical.
Okay.
And it doesn't mean, oh my God, the countdown is here. What we're going to do, we're just going to record a bunch of stuff here, and we can do some more tomorrow. If we forget something today, it doesn't matter. We can put it in. If you think of something in 20 minutes that should have been said right up front, it doesn't matter.
Great.
We are simply wanting to reduce this down to tape so that it doesn't get lost.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And the big job lays ahead. That's the editing. Okay? So I want you to completely relax. There is nothing that can't be done, redone. If we sneeze, if we cough, if, anything can
That's
be fixed.
reassuring.
If the ceiling caves in, all we do is clean up the mess and keep going.
Okay.
So everything here is real laid back. You've got a lot of information, and we want to get this down into a storyline, because I think what you've got here is something that is extremely important for people to know about.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about you, and see now where'd you start out your life? You were born and raised in the country?
Yeah,
the city?
I was raised on a farm. In fact, I live in the same neighborhood in which I grew up. It was my grandfather's farm. Part of it was divided into thirds. But in 1939, my grandfather was an obstetrician in Norfolk. He was also in the Naval Reserves. He was in charge of military intelligence in Norfolk, which is the largest military naval complex in the world. So I was born in the Naval Hospital, which was the NATO headquarters, and brought home to my grandparents' farm. My father was in the South China Seas on a naval vessel. My uncle was in the Navy. So I come from a long line of military civilian folks. They were not full time military individuals. They had jobs, and they would go into the war. They would be in reserves, and as my grandfather was, he stayed in and retired a Navy captain. But I live in a house that was in part of my grandfather's field. And
is that right?
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
But I'm being strangled financially by this Army intelligence group, JAG group, that my husband.
Now, JAG, is that JAG?
JAG, Judge Advocate General. I think American citizens do not realize how many JAGs are in our court system, and they take orders. They are in the chain of command, they're active reserve, and they are in our court system everywhere you look.
Not just federal, state and local?
Everywhere, yeah. And they're going to meetings once a month, and if there is a case like many of the military intelligence wives like myself, and we have information that would come out in a divorce hearing or whatever, they totally control it. It is Judge John Moore, in my case, in Virginia Beach, is an Army Ranger. He is active reserve. He's a VMI Army colonel. He's a graduate of VMI. In Virginia Beach, in the courts, there are at least 6 judges, and I'm including commissioners in that, because in Virginia we have a system where the commissioners do a lot of the decisions, And all of these in Virginia Beach who take care of military wives are military judges.
No, you mentioned the term VMI. What is that?
Well, VMI is Virginia Military Institute, and it's where General Marshall, the Marshall Plan, went to school. It's a little West Point. There's a lot of tradition there, but it's based on the Greek sort of Spartan military concept. And my father went to Washington and Lee, which is also in Lexington. And I know that there is some sort of, I won't say cult, but there probably is some sort of
club?
Secret society.
Okay.
And so it's very, very tight clique. But what I was trying to say is that the judges are military men, and they're not independent. They take orders.
They take orders.
There's a chain of command, and in my particular case and the other 11 military wives whom I have met so far, there are many, many more, but they've all been handled the same way. Mm-hmm. That's not a normal divorce at all.
You know, I've heard of these kind of situations before, but it's never been put so concisely and so reasonably that there would be a connection why some people just, no matter what attorney you have, it doesn't matter.
Oh, no.
The divorces and the settlements of assets never go the right way.
No, and there's a FISA court, which I know is involved in my case.
What kind of court?
Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. It's a Justice Department secret court that American citizens are not aware of. There have been a couple of articles on it. It's a small group of men, and I think there's a woman on it. I believe there's 7 justices. And in reality, the article that I read, which was given to me by Mike Fuller, and I know he would not mind me using his name, he's a government assassin. He was like my husband, a government assassin who did...
When you say assassin, you're talking like character assassination or kill people?
No, killing people.
Okay.
He's a mercenary, government mercenary.
Okay.
He was in Afghanistan and in Rhodesia, South Africa. And I met him and his wife through Sarah McClendon. He's a real wonderful patriot who is speaking out about what the NATO community and the Army and Marine Corps are doing.
And Sarah McClendon, she's an old warhorse, isn't she?
Sarah saved my life, literally.
Really?
Yeah. I had been having break-ins starting the night of March the 4th, after I was calling everywhere to see if I could find my husband. He would, disappear at times. And I found my husband's diary, which I have here, which they have been not anxious to have get out.
Uh-huh. No, they meaning?
General Sheehan, General Krulak, Marine Corps colonels, generals, Al Gray, Cook, and especially General Joy.
Joy.
General Jim Joy and General Carl Steiner they're evil men. And they are in this diary meeting with my husband almost every day in Beirut. They trained the men in black who killed those people in Waco. It was General Joy and General Steiner. Steiner's army, dirty tricks, special operations. And this is what my husband does for a living, is train mercenaries, young boys from countries like Romania, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Haiti, all these countries. They're training them to be murderers. And the taxpayers' dollars are paying for this.
Okay, now they train them just through the normal channels of the military. These kids join the Army or the Marine Corps, and then they select these kids based on some criteria to train them?
They psychologically profile them. The profile, which is similar to my husband's and Lee Harvey Oswald's and McVeigh's and some of the others who were all part of this program. Jeffrey Dahmler was profiled and hidden. You know, what most Americans do not know is that all of these men were
Jeffrey
Army.
Dahmer, he has a military background?
Of course. They're all Army.
Oh, okay.
They were all picked out because they're perverted or twisted.
Oh.
Yeah.
Sexually perverted.
Sexually perverted and therefore, you know.
Yeah.
Well, now I don't think McVeigh was perverted the way Dahmler was, but certainly the group that my husband is overseeing are twisted.
So part of the criteria, they look for people who have got something in their history that gives them a weird bend.
Yeah.
Like they were molested when they were a child,
Yeah.
or they come from dysfunctional families, abuse, whatever.
Strong mother, weak father, no father, poor. Because these guys are looking for security, so they will stay in the military and do anything for that security. This was my husband's scenario. My husband and Oswald are just two peas in a pod.
Huh.
Exactly the same personality, the same type, in the same elite group, I might add, which was doing work with communists and Russians, with Czechoslovakians and with Romanians. I met assassins, I met drug lords, Fahim Kordobawi, whose family were the drug lords in the Bekaa Valley. I mean, he knows the elite of the elite of the elite, and that's why I was warned twice not to talk.
And you were warned...
I was told that I would be killed. I was told that
Your husband warned you about this, or?
Oh, my husband warned me early on in it, but he knew that he loved me in the beginning. I'm sure he really did. But he's a robot, my husband, except when he's drinking. And I think that's why he drank, because the first 3 years of marriage, he was telling me everything. And I come from a very strong Protestant Southern culture, which, you know, when you're talking about shooting people like ducks, the only thing I can relate it to is my brothers going duck hunting, and that's what George would tell me it was like. Killing is just, you know, it's nothing. There's no emotion involved. You just get rid of somebody. And he said he was an existentialist and that these murders were necessary, and, you know, it very matter of fact. And I'd sort of go, yep, and we'd be eating dinner, and I was trying to get him to know Christ, you know, to sort of understand a little bit about my background and America's background. But his group they are not Christians. They're what he calls existentialist, and they study German Clausewitz and Nietzsche, Sartre, Camus, Montesquieu. And his thesis at Princeton, which was written for him by a very good friend of his named Todeve, who was a French count, and his thesis was on this. And it was, supposedly it was in French, but my French is better than his. So he could not have written that by himself. I know that. I know it was written for him. But in the intelligence world, and in the communist world, and the world that my husband was in, one had to know French because all of the terrorist trainers and the guys who were funding all the guerrillas and everything were in Paris and New Orleans. They would go back and forth. Still, the 4th Marines is out of New Orleans. And that's been going on a long time, ever since Disraeli, even before, I think. But they had hit squads and, you know, undercover groups in New Orleans. And George would go to New Orleans, all the Marines. I mean, this is where they train, do terrorist training, Lake Pontchartrain and places like that.
Okay, and then this would be during the 1980s?
Yeah, 1980s.
Okay.
From the I think New Orleans has been a school for a place where debauchery and murder and cults and
flourished.
yeah.
Well, there's a New Orleans connection with the JF Kennedy assassination.
Well, you see, Oswald, my husband and Oswald were in the same club. General Jim Joy is in that club. General Louis Buell, who is my husband's benefactor, or whatever you want to call it, is in that club. There is a, in fact, I've got the name of, there are Russians in that club.
Yeah, feel free to grab any reference materials.
Yeah.
You've got our
What I want to tell you about General Al Gray, my husband was the chief of staff for General Al Gray, who was the commandant of the Marine Corps. And I probably shouldn't say this on the tape, and you all can get rid of it, but he's a homosexual.
Gray.
Gray.
Okay.
He's what they call a cherry Marine. Now, I'm not anti, I'm trying to find my, I hope I've got it. Yeah, here it is.
This
Vietnam
term cherry Marine,
Cherry
is that
Marine.
that's a common phrase in the military?
See, the thing is, you know, they're guys and they're girls, and I just came from such a real prudish culture.
Yeah.
You know.
That's fine. You came from a normal culture.
And I'm not judging them, but the Vietnam War, I know a lot about that, about the MACSOG program and the Phoenix program, because George was involved with a very important part of that. Not important, really, but he and Al Gray and Louis Buell and Michael O'Boyle and Ollie Whipple were. Do you remember the Manguez and the Pueblo? Was it the
the seizure of that little ship?
Yes.
Yeah.
This was, it's run by the mob. Then it was a mob military partnership, joint. It was a joint operation in Korea and in Vietnam. The highest levels of the Marine Corps and the Army in those special operations levels, the individuals are actually in the mob. New Jersey.
You're talking about the mafia type mob?
I'm talking about the Brooklyn, New Jersey mob. My husband, Al Gray, Sheehan, they're all Brooklyn. Cap Weinberger. Heinz Kissinger, there's the Boston mob, which was shipping weapons back and forth to Northern Ireland. And I don't want to get too deeply involved in that, but it goes, Israel, some of the Zionists who came over from Germany, according to my husband, were, see, he works with those people. They do a lot of money laundering in the banks, cash transactions for the drugs that they're bringing over through Latin America, the Southern Mafia, the Dixie Mafia, which is now my husband's involved with in Miami. The military are all involved once they retire. They're, you know, they go into this drug and secondary weapons sales. And before I forget, I want to find the name of this Russian who worked with Al Gray, who was my husband's boss, and trying to see where I wrote it. I may have to look and find that another.
It's no trouble at all. How are we doing over there, guys? Sound good? How much time is rolled on the clock? On your clock? You can speak. So
20 minutes.
20? Okay, good.
I can't find it right now. I'll find it.
Right.
The Vietnam was really important because a lot of experiments were done on boys who went over there.
Mm-hmm.
I had, since my husband disappeared, and since they have been psychologically trying to destroy me, financially trying to destroy me, because I'm telling the truth. His first wife, I know, was murdered.
Okay.
She was, according to a psychiatrist whose name I probably won't give because he's an honorable man. I was given permission before I went public with Sarah McClendon at the press club anonymously, but they knew who I was on the 3rd of July, 1996, was when I came out with a small group of people. But before that time, they were trying to handle me, to try and get me to be quiet. They tried threatening me and so forth. And I'm trying to remember where I was, what I was going to, the point I was going to make. I can't remember now what I was going to. It was something important. Oh, yeah, General Jim Joy.
Yeah.
I called General Jim Joy on the phone. I was trying to find where my husband was because I didn't know whether I'd have any money to, food to eat or what. He just walked away, and I knew that the Marine Corps knew where he was. But I was being handled psychologically. On the 4th of March, my home was broken into. They had elaborate plans to handle me.
The 4th of March, 96?
1996.
96.
And keep in mind, he had disappeared on the 28th of December.
Of 96.
Of 96, 95.
Okay,
So put yourself in my shoes. I have no idea where he is. He's done this before, and each time I was totally traumatized. So I get...
What happened during this break-in?
Well, they were looking for the diary, which I have here.
Okay.
I don't have the original copy, but this is the diary.
Okay, can you lift it up so
Yeah,
we can...
sure.
Yeah, just...
This is it. It's his Beirut diary.
Kind of hold those. So
Yeah. This is it.
Okay.
And it's in his handwriting. The Beirut diary tells how the intelligence community, the Army and Marine Corps assassins, snipers, are how they operate in a city during a crisis. My husband was the liaison between the White House and President Jamal. So my husband is a friend of Scrowcroft, McFarland's a Marine. All of these men are personal friends of George's. Colby, I spoke with personally on the phone. 2 weeks later, he was murdered. He went to Princeton. My husband knew him. He knew my husband. He told me, Colby told me that...
Now this is General Colby?
No, this is William Colby, who was head of the CIA.
Oh, okay, yes.
Who was murdered in a...
so-called boating accident.
I know exactly how that happened because, you see, the SEAL teams, SEAL Team 6, 4, 6, and 8, are on the East Coast, and then the odd numbers are on the West Coast. And some of the people who are affiliated with the SEALs, I shouldn't say that. I'm not going to say it. But
well, it wouldn't be hard for a SEAL to come from underwater and tip the boat over and make sure the man's dead, that sort of thing?
the Israelis train with the SEALs. They do a lot of wet ops, murders, over here because of some sort of arrangement. The young boys, I met 3 young assassins on a bus, going up back and forth to Sarah as I went on the bus because they were sabotaging my car so often. So I sat next to 2 young assassins, one from Romania, one from Haiti. And I let them know that I understand, you know, how it is. And this little boy cried. I won't mention which one it was because it may get back to him. But he told me it was the same scenario. His mother, he lives on $850 a month. Now these are mercenaries working. The taxpayers are paying mercenaries. The taxpayers are paying young men who are not citizens of the United States to kill innocent people, women and children. They get on a flight from Norfolk and Oceana. They fly to Stuttgart, and I was told this is what they do. Then they go by a special helicopter to countries like Turkey, like the part of Iraq, to Algeria, to parts of Africa, and they do wet ops. They'll just, you know, murder 5, 10, 20 people, and then they blame it on the Arabs, or they blame it on somebody else, but it's actually NATO rogue assassins, because there are men from Australia, South Africa, Britain, that I've been able to determine, and a lot of these other little countries that are sort of wanting to get into NATO, they have little boys that they pick out, and they call them special. They use the word special, meaning elite, irregular, in order to entice these boys because they don't have much ego. So if you call being a criminal, in other words, they are protected. They know that they are above the law. That's what my husband's above the law. Judge John Moore is above the law. Colonel Barry Cantor, my husband's JAG colonel lawyer, is above the law. Grover Wright, Marine Corps. A lot of these guys who were judges had their wives gotten rid of. Judge John Moore had his first wife thrown into a mental institution before he became a judge. He battered her. And I spoke with a man who has a Purple Heart, 2 people who knew Hannah very well. And Hannah Moore was deeply in love with her husband. He got back from Vietnam. He was an Army Ranger. He battered her. He physically and psychologically abused her. And she started screaming, you know, doing because I was battered and bruised. A lot of wives are by these Vietnam vets. But if they're a colonel or if they're a rising star, the wife has got to be crazy because they've got too much invested in these men. And it's a very small cult. I mean, I have heard the things that they do when they're colonels. It's some of the same things that they do in Cap and Gown, which is the Princeton version of Skull and Bones. My husband went to Princeton after he went to the Hun School for 4 years.
Okay, now we should probably clarify a little bit about, you mentioned Skull and Bones, and Many of the people wouldn't be familiar with that, and the cap and gown. So what are these clubs that these young inductees are pulled into? Secret societies?
Secret societies. And
again, is this to make them feel super special?
Yes.
And also put a control on them
Yes.
so that you never tell these secrets?
Yes.
Oh.
That's it. You have got it.
You know, I've heard a lot of child molesters. I mean, people who are not connected with the military, just plain old child molesters, will molest a child and then tell them, now if you ever tell, you know, they'll take a cat and strangle it and kill it or something. This is what I'm going to do to your mother. This is what I'll do to you.
Yes.
Bad things will happen if you ever tell.
That's right.
And children grow up believing that I must never ever tell. And they don't, generally.
That's right.
Unless someone comes along to help them see the light and come out of it.
Yes. And you see, my husband is frightened to death. I believe that his brother was murdered to keep him in, because he had gone through 4 years of this mind control. And the man who did it, you can see this on the video, his name was Charles Caddock, and another man named Alexander Robinson.
Okay, Charles Caddock.
Caddock.
And the other one?
Alexander Robinson. Alexander Robinson was a Marine, very well-connected Presbyterian family, whose family member was the influential one who brought over the Saudis. The original Saudi head of Saudi Arabia was George told me all this about Mohammed Faisal, Khalid Faisal, and Saud Faisal, and there were something like 32 brothers of the then in the mid-50s, the ordained, you know, whoever was head of Saudi Arabia. It was actually the United States who chose that person, because the United States, through Charles Caddock and that group, murdered the good one, the one whom everybody liked, who was well educated, and who was normal. In, I believe it was 1952, 1953, 1954, in Paris, the universal Saudi, the well-educated Saudi, was poisoned.
And what would his name
Charles
be?
Caddock.
I don't suppose it's all that important, but anyway.
I'm trying to remember. I think it was Fahim, or he died in Paris. And so his brother, his half-brother or whatever, was the father of all these 32 boys, and the 3 oldest now were snuck into the United States. I have a degree in history, Virginia history, undergraduate degree, and master's in Scottish history. And being a Southerner, we always look at, you know, past is prologue. And I jumped into the Saudi Arabian books to try and find out something about the Hun School, which is in Princeton, started by a physicist connected with Einstein in that group. So I was looking for the Hun School because I knew they went there. And they're in all the brochures. They're very proud to say, you know, we have the Saudi royals went here. President Cheeseborough brags about going over there and being wined and dined, and, you know. So I only found one reference, but it was a reference that said something like they went to a prep school in the United States. That's all they said. Well, it was the Hun School, and my husband was one of the playmates. Charles Caddock was the bodyguard, quote-unquote teacher for these guys. So they would go out and play in the woods, and they were doing homosexual things with them. You know, I mean, there was a lot of money. They bought a big house.
Yeah.
And so.
Okay, now, I was momentarily distracted.
Okay.
Explain to me a little bit about this, the homosexual event here.
Well, George, for the first 3 years of our marriage, was drinking entirely too much, and he was trying to let me know about his world, and I'm not judging him. He's a bisexual.
Okay. And he
believe.
needed help.
He needed help, he needed
Still
love,
does.
he needed cry. He
Yeah.
still does.
Mm-hmm.
He really needs help. And the handlers knew that I was changing him. I was taking him away from this crazy cult
Right.
that he'd been in all these years. And I mean, we were going to church. He even walked down the aisle one time when Tony Evans preached at Scope. I mean, he was overwhelmed. And
At Scope. No,
at Scope in Norfolk, it's a big auditorium.
Okay.
And so, but he was a little boy when he was, it's mind control. MK Ultra, somebody said. They had a group of men, psychiatrists in New Jersey. I don't know where this place was, but they would go, and even his roommates in Princeton told me about it. George never, intentionally, he never introduced me to any of his friends. So I had to cold call all these people. I got their names and addresses, telephone numbers. I called all these roommates at the Hun School and at Princeton.
Mm-hmm.
They told me things about George and, holding hands with, with Caddick and other people, about being a cheerleader and going off and so forth.
Now, a cheerleader, this is a kind of a trade name, right?
No, he was a cheerleader for
At Princeton.
At Princeton.
Okay.
And he traveled with the football team.
Okay.
And here is a guy like that. They put him in the Marine Corps. I don't think that was very nice. Do you know what I'm saying? It was hard for him. But
it was part of the long-term vision.
Absolutely. They wanted him long-term. And it's because of the Saudis. This is what I believe and what his roommate believes. He had a roommate at Princeton who was also at the Hun, who's a dear, dear, wonderful. His mother is an Anglican. His father was a Jewish doctor from Brooklyn, and Jack is a dear. And we talk to each other a lot on the phone. George sort of, dismissed him because George was getting in with another crowd. George got into Cap and Gown, which is the same kind of fraternity. I mean, it's an eating club at Princeton for intelligence officers.
It's Cap and Gown. Would they have anybody involved that wasn't intelligence-oriented?
Football players and so forth. But I have a feeling that Cap and Gown has a lot of intelligence officers and boys who may have been raped. Of course, they'd never talk about it.
Right.
But I know that the initiation is, they get very drunk, and even in the Marine Corps they do that. It's called dining in. They have the shellback ceremony. They do a lot of homosexual enticement. The boys are, when they come in, when they're new recruits, they strip them nude, they violate their personal parts. There's a lot of that is going on.
What about
even now?
Tailhook?
Yeah.
Is there a connection?
Yeah, sure, because the cream of the crop is doing this. They're having group sex parties.
And that was a Navy operation too, wasn't it?
Yeah, but the Navy and the Marine Corps.
Of course not. Maybe we ought to, for those
That's another.
that Tailhook, they don't know anything about. Tailhook was, refresh our memories.
Well, Tailhook, in fact, when I was single in Norfolk, I know one of the people who was deeply involved with Tailhook, who was the captain of the Saratoga, was very much involved with this kind of behavior. And I know a lot about the, see, I never thought about group sex. This is so awful for me to contemplate that these orgies are going on all over the Mediterranean, that the captains, lieutenants, the men who rise to the top are the ones who are picked to play the games, the pool parties, the nude pool parties. And they have secretaries who come in. I've talked to 3 guys, and of course my husband, who went to these parties. But what they do is, and this is General Al Gray, who was the main prime mover, they would go to a place like Aix-les-Rosé, where Charles Caddock, this teacher who inducted, got my husband into it, he retired in one of these all-male party houses on the Mediterranean. I mean, that's where and my husband kept up with him all through the years.
But these sex parties and orgies, they're all homosexual in nature, or
well,
is there some heterosexual?
They start off with the wild secretaries. It's kind of, you know, my husband did those in Indonesia. He did them at a place in Northern Virginia with his first wife. I did not know any of this. I knew absolutely none of this when I married him. He told me he was loyal to his wife. He wanted me to think he was just apple pie, because I'm just a one-man woman.
Right.
When I took that oath to marry him, love, honor, and obey, that's me. But he, when he was married to his first wife, was just an addict. He was a sexual addict, an alcoholic addict. He loves, you know, terror, and his whole little soul was just being sucked away from him desperately. And he needs Christ. He needed me day in and day out. He did not need to be. What he's doing now is running more of these operations.
You know, as you describe this, I can't help but think of Bill Clinton.
Well, of course he was. He was one of those profile boys. But the difference between Bill Clinton, and I'm not saying Bill Clinton's better, but Bill Clinton did not he didn't know anything about the assassinations. Bill Clinton, when I was living with Sarah McClendon, the senior White House correspondent who saved my life, because she said, Mrs. Griggs, you get up here to Washington right now or you're dead. You're going to be dead. And I still feel as though I probably will be. I'll certainly be financially ruined. They are still doing psychological operations in my home, sabotaging my car, messing with my telephone, my radio. You cannot believe what I've been through in the last 2 years. It is horrible. And it's being done to other women and other wives and other men who don't go along with the program. They are murdering Marines, they're murdering sailors.
Of course, one of the best ways for you to stay alive is to do what you're doing.
Really?
Reduce this, absolutely. Reduce this to video, get this scattered all over the country. They won't touch you, because if you're dead, that validates everything you're saying, see. So,
well, they poison people.
Publicity is the best thing you can do.
Yeah, one of the things that was happening to me after, I must tell you about General Joy. I found his name all through the diary. And what was really strange was that George had mentioned him early on in the marriage, but then after a certain incident at Camp Lejeune, which I think is very interesting, relating to tailhook and something that I did there. I'll tell you about that if I can remember. I called, it took a lot for me to get General Joy's phone number, because the Marine colonels were not going to tell me, because they knew I was investigating. So nobody would tell me about General Joy. I called a person in George's address book who was a general, pretending that, I was updating my Christmas card list.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to find Jim Joy's telephone number. He said, oh, he's up there. He's running morale, welfare, recreation for the world, a payoff job with the mob.
Uh-huh.
And